Hey guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. Storycraft is a series where I do a craft and then tell you a story. And right now we are currently in the middle of our paranormal theme. This will be continuing all the way through the month of October. And I have a really great one for you guys today. This is one of my favorite spooky stories, so I hope that you guys are excited. I don't even really know where to begin with like my inspiration for this, but I think in my heart of hearts and my brain of brains that you'll really like this one. It is a fun one. It's also a little sad. It's actually a lot of sad now that I'm thinking about it. But if you have a suggestion for a story that you want to hear on this channel, I'm still taking regular Storycraft submissions. So if you have a regular fairy tale or myth or bit of folklore that you want me to tell, I'll still do that. I think I'm gonna sprinkle them in as like little mini Storycraft episodes in between here because I do miss my fairy tales. But I am also taking suggestions for paranormal spooky stories you want to hear, whether it is in the science fiction-y, maybe not so fiction anymore, realm of like alien activity, or you want to talk about more spooky things like demons and ghosties. You can leave a suggestion for what you'd like to hear in this segment of my channel in the comments below. And then as always, like, comment, subscribe because it helps my channel. And I don't know, say hi. Say hi in the comments. I am very keenly interested in what you guys think and feel about these stories, and I love sharing that with you. So without further ado, since I am now just in ramble mode, let's jump into it. So, what am I talking about today? Today, I am talking about the Winchester Mystery House. And this is a pretty famous house if you're into the spooky things. But I don't think it gets talked about enough, like, the factual nature of this house. A lot of the sensational stuff gets talked about, but I thought I would share both sides of the story with you guys here today. So first off, the Winchester Mystery House is located in San Jose, California, and I really want April to take me there, so you guys get in the comments and bug April about taking me to this house because I really want to see it. It was a home purchased by one wealthy heiress and widow, Sarah Winchester, in 1886, and it swiftly became the talk of the town in more ways than one. Legend states that she purchased the home after her husband died, and once she moved in, Sarah met with a medium who told her that her misfortunes were the result of her husband's business practices, because her husband, William Winchester, was the owner of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, a gun manufacturing company that greatly profited during the Civil War and the settlement of the West. And so to appease the spirits that had been killed by her husband's guns, Sarah had to keep building up her home and like purposefully add in false doors and fake windows and a bunch of dead ends to keep the spirits confused, so that they wouldn't bother her or visit her again. She had allegedly numerous teams of builders working on the home around the clock, never stopping construction once in 38 years, all the way up until her death in 1922. And at the time of her death, the Winchester Mystery House had 160 rooms, 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, 47 stairways, 47 fireplaces, 13 bathrooms, and 6 kitchens, which seems like not enough bathrooms to me. If you have 160 rooms, 13 seems very shy of what you need, but they were probably very large bathrooms, so I don't know. I haven't been yet. April, please take me. After her death, her house became a popular local attraction and still is to this day. So what's the real story of the Winchester Mystery House, and who was Sarah really? The real Sarah Winchester was a woman whose life was marked with tragedy after tragedy for all the years that she lived it. Like, that's not exaggeration, that's factual. Sarah Winchester was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut. She had 5 sisters and 1 brother, and one of her sisters died early in childhood, actually in infancy. And she grew up on the same street as the Winchester family, whose original business had been in shirt manufacturing, and she came up alongside her future husband, William Winchester, whom she married in 1862. In 1866, they welcomed their one and only child, Annie Pardee Winchester, named after William's deceased sister, who had actually passed away a few years earlier in childbirth in the same home that Sarah gave birth to. Or in. Words are really hard, guys. Unfortunately, Annie wouldn't live but more than a month, as she was afflicted with the wasting disease known as marasmus, which is a malnutrition disease. And it makes it very hard for them to absorb nutrition and even take in food. So she had been struggling for weeks to feed and take in any sort of nutrition or keep it in or down. So after a month, she passed away. And then a few years after that, Sarah actually lost her father as well. And then a couple years later, in a 10-month span between 1880 and 1881, Sarah lost her mother, her father-in-law, and then her husband, who had been struggling with health complications his entire life. So he actually died of tuberculosis in 1881. By 1884, her sister Mary Converse died, and she found herself at age 46 having to move across the country to California because she had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and had been struggling with it, and her doctor recommended it, hoping that the warmer climate would help alleviate her symptoms. So she took her fortune and her knowledge of finances that she had been carefully learning from her husband and her father-in-law and moved out west. By 1886, she purchased that home in San Jose, the property that would eventually become the Winchester Mystery House, along with several other homes. The death of her husband and her mother made her an extremely wealthy woman. Her mother had actually set money aside for all of the children that had remained, and her husband had inherited the Winchester Company, and then she became the sole inheritor of that. So she actually ended up with a bunch of like stocks and investments and $300,000 at the time, which in today's money is somewhere in the ballpark of like $11 million if you account for inflation today, which is wild. So she inherited about $11 million from her husband, who had inherited the Winchester Rifle Company from his dad. So like there was a lot of wealth at hand, and she did not waste her time just idling around. She actually learned how to manage finances really well, and her descendants and people that she was survived by actually went so far, not her descendants, that's incorrect. Her family, the people that survived after her, actually went on to say that she was so good with finances that she was probably better than most men. And this reflected in a lot of the business choices and things that she would make. She chose to stay removed from the Winchester Company itself and preferred to have a third party handle that for her. She had an assistant who was one of her nieces, who would do a lot of the business dealings and help her with her accounting. But for the most part, she managed her own money and just sort of let the company do what the company do. She used that money to start a life anew out in California. She brought two of her sisters and their families with her to San Jose. Unfortunately, one of her sisters in 1894 passed away. Her name was Estelle. She passed away after a lengthy struggle with depression and addiction, which is really sad, and it was after the loss of her own husband. So by this point, Sarah had kind of acquired this reputation around town as an isolated loner who would avoid high society functions and social gatherings, and because of all the loss in her life and the history that she came to California with, people would often talk about how they thought that she was holding seances and hosting mediums at her house to contact the dead. And there's not actually a drop of evidence for her contacting spirits of any kind or getting herself involved in this practice whatsoever. But it is important to note that this practice actually wasn't really uncommon at the time. It's not even something that's particularly sensational at the time because everybody was doing this in the Victorian era. It became very popular. It was thought to be a really new and almost scientific approach. Like if you were a very bright-minded person, you might participate in these because it's a new sort of thing that hasn't been really fleshed out and was considered almost scientific. To contact the dead in this manner. So having seances, speaking with mediums was sort of a new uncharted territory, and people were participating in it all over the place, everywhere. And for some reason it became very sensational that Sarah herself would possibly be doing this, to the point where this became a huge rumor surrounding her life. I also believe that it has to do, like, the reason this rumor got so big is that her status as a widow of a wealthy man whose fortune was entirely based on the death of other people or guns, whatever you choose there. I think that's what sort of fueled the fire behind these rumors, because people had some beef with the Winchester Company, especially after the Civil War, and they took a lot of the violence of that to heart and sort of directed that like vitriol towards Sarah in their like rumor process. Speaking of her husband, I'm not really going to go super into the legacy of the Winchesters and their rifles, because they were shirt makers turned war profiteers who played both sides of every single battle they got involved in, and lent their guns to the colonization of the West and eradication of native peoples of America. And I think that's all that needs to be said on that. Sarah's father, however, I will mention a little bit. He was a carpenter and encouraged all of his children to pursue whatever interested them, which was really unusual and very open-minded for the time. And this led to Sarah being surrounded by other woodworkers, architects, craftsmen of the age, and she was very interested in this stuff as a child. And later, when she was married to William, they both took up an interest in architecture when they built their home in New Haven. And at some point during the construction, she actually took over the designing process herself. And she really enjoyed going to the World's Fair with her husband when he was alive, and used these fairs to pull in inspiration from all the displays that they had there in the design of her home in New Haven. And then again, when she moved to California and bought what would become the Winchester Mystery Home, she applied all of that design inspiration into her home. So she set about designing her home with this really unique, opulent sort of architectural style. It has a lot of the highlights of that Victorian era, but also some of like, you know, these really like interesting, intricate things that you wouldn't necessarily see in most homes at the time, because she had pulled that inspiration from the World's Fair. And her whole goal was to sort of set up a home that she was very comfortable in, that she could admire and appreciate and relax in with her sisters, and, you know, take their tea around like all these beautifully constructed things in the homescape. And she really relished the challenge of designing a house that suited her whims, and she would build it suiting to her whims. So because of her health, she would often take long periods of rest and dismiss all the workers until she was ready to resume, you know, working on the house again. And if she didn't care about something, or she thought that, you know, she was done with something, or she lost interest in a project, she would abandon it as it was, which led to some of the interesting, quirky bits about the architecture, but not the more extreme things that I'll talk about in a little bit. It is safe to say that with this interest in architecture and construction and design, not enough is actually spoken about the fact that she did all the designing herself. And Sarah Winchester was actually a very like huge pioneer of architecture at the time, just completely overlooked because of the vicious rumor mill that like surrounded her life, and all the haters hating on her. They sort of overlooked the fact that she did a lot of architecture work that should be appreciated and unstudied, for the fact that like nobody else was doing that kind of stuff when she was doing it. So she was sort of a low-key architectural genius, and that gets overlooked because ghosts. Later on, she actually turned away 2 U.S. presidents who had requested to stay at her home, which led to even more rumors about her strangeness and her reclusivity. And local newspapers really jumped on this local like characterization of Sarah Winchester, starting in 1896, and they didn't really let go until years and years after her death. So from 1896 all the way past 1922, they were talking mad shit about her in the paper, and they were making up these like crazy rumors about how she was crazy, you know, besotted with her grief, obsessed with ghosts, haunted by the bloody past of the Winchester rifles. And they made up the rumors about the mediums having to build the home to appease the spirits and hide from the ghosts that would haunt her. They made up rumors about her construction practices, and a lot of those stories are still around to this day. That's what people think of when they think of Sarah Winchester. And she never made any public statements and didn't care to respond to any of the rumors, which just added more fuel to the media flame. You know, they continued to talk like trash about her because she never responded, so they just continued to get away with that, despite the fact that at this point they were just making stuff up, which was also common for news at the time. They just made stuff up. It was mostly like a gossip rag versus you know, news. So, you know, they actually got away with a lot of things and did a lot of damage to her legacy. So in April of 1906, San Francisco was rocked by a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, which caused a catastrophic amount of damage, fires, and flooding that was the result of water tanks collapsing. And the Winchester Mystery House was not spared from the carnage of this incident. And it was after this that the drive to build sort of just left Sarah. She no longer really wanted to invest in the home, and she actually considered tearing it down to start anew, but then decided to just repair the damage, clear out the rubble, and leave the house as it was, which was finished in many places with strange extra doors and stairways that led to nowhere. But these were all the result of the repairs after the earthquake. So because of the damage, there were rooms and halls and chimneys that were closed off for safety reasons, doors that were sealed, and windows that were bolted down, and the things that hadn't been finished were left unfinished because she no longer felt like driven to continue building it up. So she just made it safe to live in. And after this, Sarah herself is actually quoted as saying, "It looks as though the house has been built by a crazy person." And she was so disheartened by this earthquake, you guys. I can't even begin to describe how much her heart was broken by the fact that the earthquake damaged so much of her home after she had spent literal decades building it up. And she was just over it, and she was over the fact that the media rumor mill didn't stop even after this earthquake damaged her house. So she had these really large hedges put around the property, built up to obstruct the view into her home so she could have some kind of semblance of peace. And that was in 1906. So she stopped building on the house then, and not a lot is said about her time during 1906 to 1922, except that she spent her time making some wealthy oh my gosh, you guys, words are so hard. Making some smart investments, sort of redistributing, recalculating, refinancing, getting her wealth in order, to the point where by the time that she died, she had actually set up everything very smartly and very easily so that her wealth could be properly handled after her death. So Sarah died on September 5th of 1922 in her bed, peacefully in her sleep, and left the majority of her fortune to the William Wirt Winchester Hospital she had established in New Haven in honor of her late husband. So the majority of her money, although earned from the blood of the Winchester family rifles, actually went to a hospital to help people after her death, which I think is a really great thing. And maybe though, people will say that she didn't make any commentary about the gun violence that her husband's family had helped perpetuate and her money had come from. I think it shows where she stood. I don't think she really had much to say about what was going on. She was a Victorian woman in a time where women didn't have rights, so I don't think she was going to really make huge political commentary, especially because she wasn't interested in joining the conversation on her own life, let alone anyone else's. But she did donate all that money to a hospital, which I think shows that she wanted to help people with that money after her death. Unfortunately, after her death in 1923, John and Mame Brown leased her house and started doing tours, and they started making these wilder claims. You already thought the newspapers were out of control, they got even more out of control, making these claims about ghosts and parts of the house. And they even went so far as to say that Sarah's favorite number was 13, and would point out things in the house that would show that oh, there's 13 of these and this has 13 whatevers. The majority of these things had been added by them after her death, however. So a lot of the things that they were saying were signs of her being crazy or obsessed with ghosts were things that they added to the home after she died. And the couple ended up buying the house in 1931 and continued to make more changes to the house for many years after that. So it's not really super well documented what the original state of the home was before they bought it. So a lot of speculation is had about all the extra doors and windows and stairways and things like that, if they were exactly as they were when she passed, or if they were things that were added by the couple. A lot of the greater thought is leaning towards the couple added those in. Unfortunately, because of all the wild, outrageous things they were saying, they actually ended up upsetting a lot of Sarah Winchester's living relatives, who denounced the wild claims made by the pair and called them out for profiting off the lies that they made about their beloved relative, Sarah. And it wasn't always called the Winchester Mystery House. This was actually the most interesting fact to me. This was something that like the couple had sort of been tossing around and like bringing up during their tours, but they never actually cemented the name as the Winchester Mystery House, and it wasn't called that, in fact, until 1924, when they gave a tour to Harry Houdini, who actually gave them a bit of marketing advice and told them to use that name in the marketing. And good job, Harry, because that name actually stuck. So it was called the Winchester Mystery House from that day forward, because they got a little marketing advice from Harry Houdini, who unfortunately didn't have enough time to spend checking into all the claims, because Harry Houdini, if you guys don't know, spent a lot of his time going to these seances and ghost events to debunk them. It actually greatly offended him that this was going on and people were making money off of saying that they could talk to the dead. So he went out of his way to show up to these things to be like, that's cap. That's false. Lies. So he unfortunately didn't have time to spend all that much time looking around the Winchester Mystery Home to see about the ghost situation and denounce it. But he was there. He did go on tour, and he did give them that marketing advice that stuck around all the way to this day. In 1973, Keith Kittle became the general manager of the home and had the house renovated in the 70s and 80s, and then set out on a crusade to get the house named as a historical landmark. And today the house is owned by the Winchester Mystery House LLC, a company owned by the descendants of the Brown couple. The Browns couple. Not the Brown couple. That's so weird. The Browns, the couple. And it still does tours and hosts many a ghost hunter to this day. It appears in a great deal of popular media, notably the movie by the name of Winchester, which I love, starring Helen Mirren, that was actually pretty good, if I do say so myself, despite being panned critically, which I think is unfair. I think it's not like the scariest movie of all time, but it's still a pretty decently good movie. Solid story. Although it does say that it's based on a true story, I will have to say that. And after I learned all this information about Sarah Winchester, it is not based on a true story. It's based on all the rumors around a true story. And that's okay for movies, not okay for news. It was also the inspiration for Disney's Haunted Mansion and Stephen King's Rose Red miniseries, and has shown up in a few musicals and a countless number of ghost hunter shows. Also, I can't say the name Winchester without mentioning that Sam and Dean of the Supernatural series are related to Sarah Winchester. And the Winchester Mystery Home also features in several books, my favorite of which I will link below, as I pulled a bunch of information out of there. There's actually a really good book about the history of the house and Sarah's true life in it, so I will link that down below. I won't link the book, I'll put the book in the description so that you guys can check it out, because I really enjoyed it, and I think if you like this story, you'll really enjoy it too. And yeah, that's everything I have to say about the Winchester Mystery House. I hope that you guys enjoyed this little ride down the road. I am noticing as I do this series that I'm like, oh, here's this really spooky thing, but it's not actually that spooky. And I don't know if that's like the skeptic nature in me, or if that's just like how facts are being presented, and I'm sort of like caught up in the hype of the sensationalism until I do the research, and then I'm like, oh, well, maybe it's not as scary as I thought it was to begin with. This did not diminish my burning desire to see this house anymore. I actually want to see it more, so I can try to figure out what parts were added and what parts were the original. Not that I have architectural eye and can point those things out. I just want to go and look and be like, I bet you that wasn't part of the actual house. Because that's just the kind of person that I am. And yeah, and maybe after this much time, I mean, there's lots of people who say that they have experiences with ghosts in that house, so maybe there are ghosts there now. I mean, there's no reason why there wouldn't be. There's basically ghosts everywhere anyone has ever died. That's how ghosts work. So, rest easy with that on your mind before you go to bed, if you're listening to this before bed. So, yeah, that's what I thought. If you have been to the Winchester Mystery House, I would love to hear your experience there. If you felt like anything was off, if you had any encounters, I would actually love to hear that. So please leave that in the description box below. Would you go to the Winchester Mystery House? I don't know. Some people are a little bit scared of the spooky thing, so they may not go. I would go, because I'm terrified of spooky things, but I want to witness all of them. So, yes, I would be there. And, yeah, now that we're on the ramble segment, Let me know what you guys thought of the Winchester movie, too. I also want to know. Because I actually liked it, and I don't know why people hated on this movie so much. I think Helen Mirren was a treat. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Because now I am extra rambles. And I'll let you guys go. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces. And I will catch you guys all in the next one. Until then, happy crafting. Bye!